welcome back to Shop Talk. Ever had your car need a repair and suddenly found yourself asking, okay, what part should I actually use here? I know, it's a
Oh,
super
yeah.
common situation, deciding between sticking with what the car was originally built with, or, exploring other options.
It really is a crossroads for many car owners. That choice between OEM and aftermarket parts, it comes up quickly, and it impacts a surprising number of things. The repair cost, sure, but also how your car performs down the road, even questions about your warranty or insurance coverage.
Exactly. And to help us kind of cut through the confusion, we've pulled together some sources, articles from industry experts, and a really insightful new segment from Atlanta News First that throws a spotlight on a tricky real-world problem.
Yeah, that new segment was interesting. So our goal in this episode is to clearly define these terms, OEM and aftermarket, weigh the pros and cons of each type of part, and then look at the practical consequences for your vehicle, your wallet. And we'll definitely hit on that insurance angle because, as the sources show, that's where things can get unexpectedly complicated.
Yeah, potentially involving significant cost differences which nobody wants as a surprise.
Definitely not.
Yeah, so let's get into it.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Welcome to Shop Talk, the podcast where auto repair pros get real insights to grow smarter, run smoother, and boost profits.
So let's start at the beginning then. What exactly is an OEM part, and how is it different from an aftermarket part?
Good place to begin. So OEM stands for Original Equipment Manufacturer. These are parts made by the vehicle's original manufacturer. Think Ford parts for a Ford or Toyota parts for a Toyota.
Got it.
Or they might be made by a company specifically authorized by that manufacturer to make them.
The key thing is, they're designed to be identical to the parts your car came with off the assembly line.
Identical?
Identical? Yeah, meaning the exact original specifications and quality.
Okay, so it's the official manufacturer-approved version, the real deal, so to speak, and aftermarket.
Aftermarket parts are different. These are produced by third-party companies, completely independent of the original vehicle manufacturer.
Ah, okay. And these are the ones you see pretty much everywhere else then? Independent mechanics, online stores, the big auto parts chains.
Precisely. And because they're made by all these separate companies, they're often designed to fit a range of vehicle models, maybe not just one specific make and model.
Right, like a more universal fit sometimes.
Exactly. And this is where the quality, the fit, and the overall performance can start to vary, sometimes quite a bit.
That variability sounds like something we definitely need to dig into. So let's look at the case for OEM first. If I choose the manufacturer's part, what are the big upsides? Why would I do that?
Well, the number one reason people often point to is quality assurance. These parts are built to the strict quality standards set by the car manufacturer itself. The sources mentioned they undergo pretty extensive testing, so you have a high degree of confidence in their reliability. They should just work.
And I imagine that rigorous testing and specific design mean you're almost guaranteed a perfect fit. No fiddling around.
You are, almost always. They are designed specifically for your vehicle's make and model. That perfect fit ensures seamless integration into your car's existing systems, which can really reduce the risk of problems popping up later because of some ill-fitting part. Installation is usually easier too.
What about warranties? Does using OEM play a role there? Because that's always a worry.
A big one, yeah. Using OEM parts typically helps preserve your vehicle's original manufacturer warranty if your car is still under that warranty. Repairs using OEM parts are usually covered, and the sources do point out that using non-OEM parts, especially for certain critical systems, could potentially jeopardize that warranty.
Okay, so that's a major consideration, especially on a newer car. So you get guaranteed quality, a perfect fit, and you keep your warranty intact. Does that mean performance stays exactly as the engineers intended to?
It should, yes. Since they match the original components precisely, they're designed to maintain the vehicle's intended performance characteristics and the integrity of its systems. There's no guesswork on how the new part will interact with the old ones.
And I suppose it also simplifies the process of actually finding the right part. Less confusion?
Much simpler. You don't have to wade through dozens of different brands or options online or at the store. You just get the one version recommended by the manufacturer for your specific vehicle. It's straightforward.
Plus, doesn't keeping it original sometimes help if you decide to sell the car later on? Like, does it affect resale value?
That's definitely a factor mentioned in the sources, yeah. Vehicle service with OEM parts are often seen as having been maintained closer to their original condition.
I could
And
see
this can
that.
be appealing to used car buyers and can sometimes positively influence appraisal values, which matters if you plan to sell or trade in. Dealerships often prefer it.
Okay, so those are some pretty strong arguments for OEM quality, fit, warranty, performance, ease of selection, and maybe even resale value. But let's be real, there's a major reason people hesitate, right? It's not always the first choice.
Absolutely. The biggest barrier for most people is, well, the cost. OEM parts are almost always more expensive.
How much more are we talking?
One source puts the difference at potentially 20% to 60% higher than comparable aftermarket parts.
Wow, 60%. That's significant.
It is. While some see it as paying for that guaranteed quality and fit, it's a significantly higher upfront expense.
And are they always easy to find quickly if I need a repair done fast?
Not always as easy as aftermarket, no. They're primarily sold through dealerships,
Right.
which can sometimes mean less immediate availability, potentially leading to longer wait times for repairs, especially if the part isn't a common one they keep in stock. Your local independent mechanic might also have a harder time sourcing them quickly compared to aftermarket options they use daily.
What about the design itself? Like, technology moves fast. Are OEM designs always the most up-to-date?
Interestingly, not necessarily. The manufacturer's design process for replacement parts can sometimes be slower. Aftermarket companies, because they specialize and compete fiercely, can sometimes incorporate the latest technology or material advancements faster than the original manufacturer gets around to updating their replacement parts.
Huh, okay. And unlike aftermarket, you don't really have a choice within the OEM world, do you? It's just the one part.
You don't. With OEM, you get the single standard part from the manufacturer for your model year. There's no variety in terms of different price points or perhaps slightly different performance levels, which you definitely find abundantly in the aftermarket world.
Okay, that neatly leads us right into aftermarket parts. If cost is the big con for OEM, I assume cost savings are the big pro for aftermarket.
Without a doubt. The primary draw is the lower cost. Aftermarket parts are typically maybe 20% to 50% less expensive than OEM equivalents.
That's a big saving.
It is. This makes them a really attractive, budget-friendly option, especially for repairs on older vehicles where the initial investment has already depreciated significantly. You might not want to put top-dollar parts into a 10-year-old car.
Makes sense. And accessibility sounds like another major advantage. Easier to get your hands on them.
Much more accessible generally. They're available from a huge network of auto shops, online retailers, local mechanics, you name it. This widespread availability can mean quicker repairs because the part is often easier to find quickly, no matter where you are or who's doing the work.
Plus, since there are so many different companies making them, there must be just a ton of variety, right?
A vast amount. It's a huge industry, lots of manufacturers. This gives you, the consumer, a wide spectrum of choices, different price points, different quality levels, and that's key, and even different performance characteristics.
So you could potentially choose based on your specific need.
Exactly. You might find a part tailored to specific needs or preferences you might have, maybe a heavier duty version or something.
And you mentioned that some aftermarket companies might innovate faster. Does that mean sometimes an aftermarket part could actually be better than the original OEM part?
That's a potential upside the sources highlight, yes. Now, it's not always the case. You need to be careful. But some reputable aftermarket brands do focus on improving OEM designs, maybe using more durable materials or slightly better engineering based on known failure points of the original.
Interesting. Like for what kind of parts?
Well, for certain components, like specific types of performance brake pads or high-flow air filters or maybe upgraded suspension parts, you can potentially find aftermarket options that exceed the original quality or performance spec. Innovation can be fast.
I even saw a note in one of the sources that using aftermarket parts could potentially influence your insurance costs. How does that work?
Yes, it's related to the repair cost. Because aftermarket parts are generally cheaper, using them lowers the overall cost of repairs after an accident. Some insurers definitely favor this to keep claim costs down, which in theory could sometimes contribute to slightly lower premiums for you. But that's not a guarantee. It really depends heavily on your specific insurer and policy.
Right? Don't bank on that saving alone. Okay, so saving money, lots of choices, easy to find, potentially even better performance in some cases. Sounds pretty great. But we know there's always a catch, right? What are the significant risks or downsides with aftermarket parts?
The major risk, the one you absolutely need to be aware of, is the potential for reduced or inconsistent quality.
The variability again.
Exactly. As we mentioned, quality varies significantly between manufacturers. Some aftermarket brands are excellent, truly meeting or even exceeding OEM standards. Others, well, they might not meet even basic standards.
And what happens then?
A low-quality part can lead to all sorts of issues, problems with fit, subpar performance, poor durability. It might simply wear out much, much faster than an OEM or a quality aftermarket alternative. You might end up replacing it again sooner.
And just like using non-OEM parts can affect your vehicle warranty, using aftermarket parts can have warranty implications too, but maybe in a different way.
Correct. Using an aftermarket part could potentially void your vehicle's manufacturer warranty,
How so?
especially if that aftermarket part fails and its failure causes damage to other related components in your car. The manufacturer might say, hey, that wasn't our part that caused the cascade failure.
Ouch. So checking the fine print is crucial.
It is critical. You need to read your vehicle's warranty terms very carefully before making a decision, particularly for newer cars or if you're dealing with major system repairs like the engine or transmission.
What about those fitment issues you mentioned earlier? How common are they really with aftermarket parts? Is it a big problem?
They can happen, yeah, because aftermarket parts are often designed to be compatible with multiple models or even multiple makes sometimes.
Right, the universal approach.
While many fit perfectly fine, some might not match your specific vehicle's design quite as precisely as an OEM part would. And this can cause installation headaches for the mechanic, maybe require frustrating adjustments or modifications.
And that can affect performance too.
It can. Think of things like body panels, fenders, bumpers that just don't line up perfectly, leaving uneven gaps.
Yeah, that looks bad.
Or headlights that aren't quite sealed right and end up getting condensation inside. Or even worse, electronic sensors that aren't calibrated correctly for your specific car and trigger persistent warning lights on your dashboard.
Oh, the dreaded check engine light for no good reason.
Exactly. That kind of thing can be a real headache to diagnose and fix.
And is it true that aftermarket parts don't necessarily have the same standardized, rigorous testing as OEM parts?
In general, no, they don't. OEM parts go through the manufacturer's specific, often very rigorous testing protocols tied to the vehicle's overall design and safety standards. Aftermarket parts. The level of testing and quality control can vary hugely depending on the brand and the price point. Those really cheap, no-name options might not have been tested much at all.
So their lifespan of reliability is kind of unknown.
It can be uncertain, yes. You're relying more on the reputation of the specific aftermarket brand.
And with potentially thousands of brands out there, just choosing one must be overwhelming sometimes.
It definitely can be. The sheer volume of brands and options available, especially online, can be really confusing.
Yeah.
Without specific knowledge or maybe guidance from a trusted mechanic, it's easy to feel lost and maybe accidentally pick a low-quality part that doesn't perform well or last very long. Researching reputable brands becomes really key here.
Okay, so balancing all of that, the pros and the cons of each. Are there specific situations where the sources strongly recommend just sticking with ODM regardless of the cost?
Yes, there are definitely scenarios where OEM is generally considered the safer and often the recommended choice. The first one, and probably the most important, is for critical safety components.
Right? Like, what kind of parts specifically are we talking about?
Anything that directly impacts your safety on the road. So, your brakes pads, rotors, calipers, airbag system components, that's a huge one. Suspension parts like control arms or ball joints, and steering components like tie rods or the steering rack.
Makes sense. You don't want to compromise there.
Absolutely not. OEM parts for these systems are designed and extensively tested specifically for your vehicle to ensure they meet strict crash safety and performance standards. While aftermarket safety parts exist, there's less certainty they've undergone that same level of vehicle-specific safety testing.
And one source mentioned a specific risk.
Yeah, it specifically highlighted the potential long-term risk of something like a steering failure if a poorly designed or manufactured aftermarket tie rod or ball joint is used and wears out prematurely. That's certainly not a component you want to gamble with to save a few bucks.
Definitely not. Okay, what's another time OEM is often the best path according to the sources?
If maintaining your vehicle's resale value is a high priority for you, we touched on this earlier, but using OEM parts helps keep the car closer to its original factory specifications. This is generally preferred by used car buyers, dealerships conducting trade-in appraisals, and it can help preserve or even slightly increase the car's value when you eventually sell or trade it in. It signals good upkeep.
Okay, that makes sense. And of course, Probably the most straightforward one. If the car is still under the manufacturer's warranty.
Yeah, this one is often non-negotiable, really. Many manufacturer warranties explicitly require that repairs, especially for major systems, use genuine OEM parts.
And if you don't?
If you use a non-OEM part and something goes wrong later, even if it seems unrelated, the manufacturer could potentially deny warranty coverage for that failure or related systems. They'll say the aftermarket part compromised the system.
So you definitely need to check your warranty booklet. What kind of parts did the sources mention here?
They listed examples like critical engine sensors, complex gaskets, timing belts, alternators, the engine control unit or ECU, wiring harnesses, and even crucial components in EV batteries. For things like that, OEM is usually the way to go to keep that warranty valid.
And finally, maybe a simpler reason. If you just want the repair process itself to go as smoothly as possible, less hassle.
That's a valid point too. OEM parts generally guarantee a hassle-free installation because they're designed precisely for your car.
Right? The perfect fit.
They should fit perfectly without requiring adjustments, guesswork, or modifications by the mechanic. This helps avoid those frustrating issues we mentioned with some aftermarket parts, like the misaligned body panels, sensors tripping warning lights, or headlight assemblies that leak or don't seal properly. It can save time and frustration during the repair itself.
Okay. This brings us perfectly to that really interesting and potentially quite frustrating real-world conflict that was highlighted in the Atlanta news segment. This disconnect between what a repair shop might prefer to use and what an insurance policy actually covers.
Yeah, this is where the rubber really meets the road after an accident, isn't it? It's a common point of friction. While collision repair shops might ideally prefer the known quality and perfect fit of OEM parts for a seamless repair, insurance policies are very frequently written to mandate the use of less expensive options. They'll specify aftermarket parts or sometimes even used or reconditioned parts purely to control their claim payout costs.
And that Atlanta News First segment shared that specific anecdote about the viewer who ended up facing a, what was it, $2,300 bill difference.
That's right, $2,300. Because their insurer only authorized payment for aftermarket parts, but the repair shop went ahead and used more expensive OEM parts, leaving the car owner stuck with that substantial gap.
Wow, that's a huge unexpected expense.
It is, and it's a situation nobody wants to find themselves in. The collision shop owner they interviewed explained that using aftermarket parts is basically standard practice dictated by what most insurance companies approve.
Yeah, so the shop's hands are often tied?
To some extent, yes. They can usually only request OEM parts if they can definitively prove to the insurer that a specific aftermarket alternative won't fit properly or function correctly.
And that's not always easy to do up front.
Exactly. And here's a really tricky practical point they brought up. Insurers often don't pay shops extra labor time to pre-fit parts like fenders or doors before painting them.
Oh, I see.
So a potential fitment issue with an aftermarket part might not become obvious until after it's already been painted and the shop is trying to actually install it on the car. This creates a real dilemma and can lead directly to that kind of cost dispute with the customer or the insurer.
Wow, I can imagine a shop feeling really stuck in that situation. Okay, so the absolute crucial takeaway from that news segment for anyone listening is, what? What should you do?
Call your insurance agent or company now. Like today, pick up the phone and ask them specifically, point blank, about your policy's coverage regarding OEM versus aftermarket parts before you ever need a repair after an accident.
Don't wait until the car's already in the shop.
Absolutely not. Don't wait until you're stressed, dealing with an accident's aftermath, and suddenly facing a big bill or debate about parts. Find out your coverage in advance.
And the segment mentioned some insurers handle this differently. It's not universal.
They did. Apparently, some insurers, they mentioned Liberty Mutual and Farmers as examples, offer specific coverage for OEM parts. But often it's an optional rider or endorsement you have to specifically ask for and pay extra premium for.
So it's not standard on most policies.
Probably not, no. The segment did mention one insurer, Chubb, which reportedly uses factory original parts as their standard for all repairs. But based on the reporting, that seems to be more the exception rather than the rule. Most default to aftermarket or alternatives to save money.
Okay, going back to that viewer's $2,000 to $300 charge, should they actually have to pay that difference out of pocket? What determines that?
Well, according to the news segment, the viewer's liability likely comes down to the contract they signed with the repair shop when they dropped off the car.
The repair authorization form.
Exactly. If that contract contained language where they agreed up front to pay any difference between what the insurer covered and the cost of OEM parts if used, then they might technically be responsible for that $2,300.
Even if they didn't fully realize it?
Potentially, yes. The news story did note, however, that there were questions in that specific case about whether the shop had fully and clearly informed the viewer about this potential extra cost beforehand, suggesting it was a point of contention and maybe why it became a news story. Transparency is.
Wow, that is a lot to navigate just for a car repair. So, okay, how do you synthesize all of this? How does someone make an informed decision when they're standing there needing a part?
It really boils down to your personal priorities and the
Right.
specific part that's needed for the repair. You have to balance that desire for, the exact original fit, the guaranteed original performance, and potentially easier installation or warranty protection.
Which all points towards OE.
Right. You balance that against the often significant cost savings, the wider availability, and the potential for maybe different or even improved options that you might find with aftermarket.
And if you do lean towards aftermarket, especially to save money, research is paramount, isn't it?
Absolutely. Quality varies so widely. Don't just automatically pick the cheapest part you find online, especially if it's for an important system like brakes or steering. Take the time to research reputable aftermarket brands that have a known track record for quality and proper.
Ask your mechanic for recommendations.
But as a general rule, kind of summing up the guidance from the sources for those critical safety components, or if your car is still under the manufacturer's warranty, OEM is almost always the recommended and safer bet, even if it costs more upfront.
That's the clear guidance, yes. And maybe the biggest action item for listeners. Take that step now to understand your own insurance policy. Knowing their stance on parts before an accident happens can save you a significant headache and potentially a lot of money down the line. Forewarned is forearmed.
It's clearly a decision point with pretty significant implications, not just for the immediate repair, but for your vehicle's future and your wallet, too.
Indeed, it is. It's worth thinking about before you're forced to make a quick choice.
So, here's a final thought to leave you with something building on that insurance angle. Given that insurance policies so often push towards using aftermarket parts to control costs, does this situation effectively shift the burden of ensuring quality and ensuring a perfect fit entirely onto you, the car owner, or maybe onto the repair shop? And could that potentially compromise the original design integrity and safety that the manufacturer engineered the vehicle with in the first place? It's a fascinating ripple effect to consider when you're thinking about your car's maintenance, repairs, and who's ultimately responsible for the outcome.
Something to think about. Thanks for tuning in to Shop Talk by Shopofficer. If you found this helpful, share it with a fellow mechanic or shop owner and follow for more real-world advice. Want to take your shop digital? Visit shopofficer.com to get started for free. Until next time, keep wrenching smarter.
1, 2,